So, day 2 was my free day, the main day that I was going to look around Gloucester. It started with a lie-in, in fact. I didn't get up until, I don't know, about maybe 8:30, something like that. Maybe even 9. And that was sort of deliberate, really. And then I went for breakfast, and breakfast finished at 10, so I sort of only just made it again. And then it was time to venture out, and I began by exploring the Gloucester Quays shopping centre, and that led me as far as the docks. And then I walked around the docks, and it was literally as I came to things I sort of went into them. So I crossed over the drawbridge to begin with, walking on the far side, and I found an antique centre which I looked in, and then I wandered past all the warehouses that were around there, and then I came across Mariners Chapel, so I looked in there. And then I came across the Waterways Museum, which was interesting because it really was like walking round a 3-storey warehouse. It was inside one of the warehouses that just had like piles of stuff to do with waterways, obviously, but sort of just piles of stuff, and literally you just sort of walked around. It was probably the least exciting of all of it, and not terribly easy to know exactly where to go next, if that made sense. You started on the 3rd floor and worked your way down, but it was inside a huge warehouse that was like, I don't know, probably 10 stories high, and it just occupied a little bit. I decided not to go for the boat ride because it was going to be a sort of 45-minute to hour length of time, and I wasn't quite sure how much time I had. So I thought, well, I can come back and do that at some other point. You know, but it's important to get round everything that I need to in Gloucester before things start to close at 5. So after the Waterways Museum, I had pretty much done the docks and the quayside, and it was time to head over towards town. And I started on the southwest side of town and worked my way sort of north from there. Now the southwest, above the sort of quayside, north of the quayside, is their judicial section, I suppose you could say, of the city, and it held the prison, the police station, and a place called, well, a complex called Shire Hall, which I think was a little bit like their criminal courts and possibly some of their council buildings as well. Oh, I might add that I went into a military museum, Soldiers of Gloucester, that was the one, on my way there. That was much better, slightly cheaper, only 2 stories high, and it was more, there was lots more to see behind sort of glass cabinets and lots to read, and that was that was more interesting. And I did that sort of as I was leaving the area going north. So once I'd walked through the Shire sort of area, I came out, you know, just east. East, just east of the pedestrianised zone, and I found myself by St Nicholas Church, and St Nicholas Church was closed, but a beautiful church from the outside still, and opposite that is the Folk Museum, which is interesting because it's in a Tudor house that's 550 years old, and the floorboards are so creaky, it's unbelievable. So I looked around that was fabulous. There was sort of like little rooms here, there and everywhere, and there was far more stuff that you could do that was interactive, you know, buttons to press, wheels to turn, that sort of thing. And that was fantastic. They even gave me a card that gave me 12 months free access if I wanted to come back. I don't think I'll be back in 12 months, just because it's so far away from where I am, but it's the sort of place that if I did live locally, yes, I probably would go in, because it had its own little tea shop at the back, which I didn't sample, but I walked through. And I can imagine myself sort of going there quite often. Anyway, after that, I was still heading north at this point, and I was sort of heading through a residential estate, really, but it held two objects of interest. One, this residential estate was based around a church called St Mary's. St Mary's is a beautiful little church, again closed, unfortunately, but nevertheless very beautiful. And then at the top of the residential estate was a park, and in this park was the remnants of St Oswald's Abbey, or whatever it is, Priory or something like that, an Anglo-Saxon sort of structure, not much left of it, but I wanted to see that as well. So after I'd done that, I was level with the cathedral, which is sort of central and north, and the idea then was to sort of go back down through the centre, sort of heading south. So I went west. No, I didn't. Yes, I did. Oh, I don't know. I get west and east muddled up. I think I'd come up the west side. Yes, I'd come up the west side. So I was going down the sort of central side. And I started with the cathedral. The cathedral was magnificent, much bigger and more extensive than I remember. I remember the nave with the fat pillars and that it was rather dark inside. You know, and I then walked around the ambulatory, north side first. So I hit the transept, and it was weird because there was no transept doors. There was a door on the south side, but it was right up near the west end. That was where you sort of came in. They had some beautiful little side chapels dedicated to, I think one was St Andrew, I think that was the best one. But there were several there, until you came to the large lady chapel, right at the very east end behind the choir. Huge! Massive, so massive that it had its own little chapels right at the end. Their Iridros, which is weird, in the at the east end is a stained glass window. So you think, if you're in the choir, that that's the end of the building, and you don't realise that lower down below this window there's this lady chapel that goes on for another, gosh, whole church. Anyway, then I sort of headed back towards the nave, but this time I was on the north side, and there was the military chapel there, and then there was the entrance to the treasury, and that was small but interesting, and that was free. I hasten to add that the Gloucester Cathedral is actually free to enter. I did pay a sizable donation. I also paid for the privilege of taking photos, though I took no photos. Well, I think I took one or two, but not many. I did take some video inside, which I don't usually do inside the cathedral. Then there was the chance to go up to the Triforium, and I don't know how extensive their Triforium is, but the bit that was open was the bit where you could sort of go round above the choir, and then you cross between the Lady Chapel on the east and that stained glass window I was talking about on the west, and then you come down on the other side of the choir. So it was basically a bridge across the top. It was bizarre. It was, you know, Triforiums are not usually open at all to the public in any cathedral. So that was very, very good. You did have to pay a little charge for that, and rightly so. So I did that. The crypt was closed, but you could go down via a free tour, but the tours were only at certain times, so I thought, well, I'm not going to wait for that. Excuse me. I know what a crypt looks like. It's just full of monuments and dead bodies. So I didn't do that. There was also a tower tour. I think you had to pay for that, and similar, you had to go up at certain times, so I didn't bother with that either. Heights are not particularly my thing, so I wasn't too bothered about either of those things. Then it was out into the cloisters. Now the cloisters were on the north west side, and they're complete. So you have the full square of arched walkways, absolutely fantastic, and a beautiful garden, square garden in the middle. Not sure what happened to the chapter house. I think the chapter house was a large sort of place that was off limits on the sort of north-east side of the cloisters, because there was something there that looked like a huge sort of, wasn't exactly a chapel because there was no altar, but there was a huge room which looked like it did have stalls in. However, it was rectangular and not sort of circular like chapter rooms in that aged building usually are. So I'm not quite sure where that was, or if I saw that or not. On the western side of the cloisters was the area that was obviously at one point the actual monastic sort of foundation, and in it was the bits that you could go in were so after that I left, and it was time to sort of head south and do the last things that were sort of on the list. And the first one of those was Blackfriars, and Blackfriars it's actually national heritage, I think, English heritage owned. It's free and it looks like it's a proper building, and I sort of walked around the grounds, but I couldn't get into the house because there was some sort of thing going on. I think there was a wedding or something like that. I think you can hire out the building or something like that. So my look around there was pretty brief, and then it was back on the other side of the sort of main street, but at the same level, and you had Greyfriars. Now there were two bits associated with Greyfriars. The first was a church called St Mary Le Crypt, and it was a sort of bizarre little church set sort of in a graveyard that was quite spooky really, but there was also a beer festival going on there, and so that was interesting. There was live music, there was a barbecue. I didn't have anything, I don't drink, so I didn't have any drink, and I didn't taste the barbecue just in case it was, you know, don't want to get ill. And next to that is the ruins of the Greyfriars Priory. Not much of that left, it's just a shell, but it's a nice area to sit in, and I sort of do have recollections of that from visiting in 1999. That was the only other thing that I recalled at all. So that was nice. On the High Street I also visited St Michael's Tower, which is the steeple of a church that's left, and that's all it is. The rest of the church was demolished, but the tower was left, and they've turned it into a little coffee shop, which is nice. But I didn't stay for that. I just looked at the history of it, and then I wandered off. I'd already been through St Lucy's Garden in the north, and seen St John's Church from the outside, and that was after the cathedral. And then what else did I do? then I started to walk, and I was heading south, but on the east side, and I was looking for Gloucester Park. I found St Michael's Square, and I had a little sit down there. I have to say that I'd eaten something in the little coffee shop at the cathedral, and I'd also had a Kentucky Fried Chicken in town as well. So I was okay for food, and I found Gloucester Park. This was about 4 o'clock, and I was okay because I thought, well, I've seen almost everything that I think I need to see. So I'm alright spending time here because the shops are going to shut shortly. So I looked around Gloucester Park, and I found that a huge fun fair was inhabiting about half of it. So I looked around that as well. I didn't go on any rides, but I was soaking up the ambience, and I must have been there for quite some time, which was fabulous. Then I walked on the sort of ring road that just went all the way back north and curved round behind the cathedral, and on the other side of that is the train station, and I sort of needed to know where the train station was. That was the sort of the walk, I suppose, of the day, because that was I had to find that, and on the way back I discovered the City Museum, which had shut and wasn't open on Sunday, so I missed that one, unfortunately. But as far as I know, that's the only one that I'd missed out. So now, having covered the north, south, east and west of the city, found the train station and done the docks, it was time to go home. So I went home, but on my way I stopped at the cinema, which I knew was in the far side of the Gloucester Quays complex, and I booked myself to see a showing at 7 o'clock of a cinema, a film. So I came back here, and I, set the camera on, recharge again, and stuff like that, and then off I went to the cinema, and that was lovely. Started at 7, it was over by about 9:30, so that was fine. I managed to get through the Gloucester Quays complex back to this side before they shut it all down. They don't tend to shut it all down during the week, but at the weekend they do, although they have to leave the front door open because the front door is attached to the car park above, and of course people need access to that car park sort of 24/7. So you can always sort of get in, it's just one way in and one way out. You can't actually walk through to the docks on the other side. And once I came back here, I decided that I was going to sort of explore. I had my meal, obviously, over in the Peel Centre, which is across the road on the other side. I decided that I was going to look at the bar area in the Travelodge Hotel, because obviously the day before I'd done the sort of television and the amenities. I did also try to get some pictures of Gloucester at night from the top of the multi-storey car park. In one way I'm glad I didn't bother too much to go sort of walking, because not even the cathedral is lit up at night, which I think is a bit of a shame. So there wasn't much in the way of photos that I could get anyway. And that was it really, until this morning, when I got up bright and early and had my breakfast. And now it's time to go and do the last sort of little bits of wandering around that I need to do before I go and meet Andy Costello in Costa Coffee at 11:30. And then after that I've got a few hours, because I've paid for late checkout at 2 o'clock just because my train home isn't until much later, and the less time I have wandering around with all my suitcase and stuff, the better. And then it'll be administration time, because I've got to sort of write this all up and sort it all out. So that's what I'll be doing sort of this afternoon when I've got my case. I'll find a place to sit down and write, and then it'll be the journey home, and that will be that.